She had 1 hour to leave town, or 1 hour to die. That was the choice they gave her. And she chose neither, because somewhere out in that burning desert, past the Redrock canyons and the bleached bones of horses that didn't make it, the man she loved was riding straight into a trap that she had accidentally set. And if she didn't reach him before sundown, the West would swallow him whole, and no one would ever speak his name again. This is not a story about a hero. This is not a story about a villain. This is a story about two people who had no business loving each other, and loved each other anyway. And what that love cost them. What it cost everyone around them. And the one secret that changed everything. Backstory. Her name was Cecelia Voss. And the first time she saw him, she thought he was already dead. It was 1883. The town of Redrock Crossing sat like a wound in the middle of the Arizona Territory, a cluster of sun-bleached buildings, a broken church steeple, and one water well that everyone fought over come August. It wasn't a town that attracted dreamers. It attracted people who had run out of somewhere else to go. Cecelia had come from St. Louis, which sounds elegant until you understand why she left. Her father owed debts to men who don't write letters. Her mother had been dead 3 years. Her younger brother needed a doctor that St. Louis could no longer provide once the money ran dry. So she had taken the only job offered to a woman with no land and no husband. She became the school teacher at Redrock Crossing's one-room schoolhouse, earning $14 a month and a cot behind the building. She was 24 years old. She had read more books than anyone in that town combined, and she had never once fired a gun. That September morning, she was walking to the well before class when she found him face down in the red dirt behind the livery stable. His shirt was soaked through with blood. His horse was gone. His hat lay 3 feet away like it had tried to escape on its own. She knelt beside him, pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck, and felt a pulse so faint it was almost an insult. She should have walked away. Every single instinct she had, every warning her father had ever given her, every story she'd heard about men who ended up bleeding in alleys, told her to stand up and keep walking. Instead, she looked around to make sure no one was watching, and then she dragged him inside. Build curiosity. His name was Cole Maddox. She didn't know that yet. She didn't know much of anything for the first 2 days, except that he ran a fever that made the air around him shimmer, that he muttered names in his sleep she didn't recognize, and that the wound in his side was clean enough to have been made by someone who knew exactly where to put a knife. She told no one, not the blacksmith next door, not Mrs. Pruitt, who ran the boarding house and knew everything that happened in Redrock Crossing within 4 hours of it happening, not Marshal Holt, who she saw twice a day walking his deliberate loops through town, thumbs hooked in his belt, eyes scanning like a man always expecting trouble. She didn't tell anyone because something about this man, bleeding and helpless in her storage room, felt like a secret the town wasn't ready for. On the 3rd day, he opened his eyes. They were gray, not the soft gray of overcast sky, but the sharp gray of flint. The kind of gray that suggests something harder underneath. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, quietly and without any particular emotion, "You should have left me out there." She handed him a cup of water and said, "Probably." And that was the beginning. World building. Now, here is what Cecelia did not know, what she couldn't have known. Cole Maddox was wanted in 3 territories. He had a bounty on his head that could have fed a family in Redrock Crossing for 4 years. He had ridden with a gang called the Harlan brothers, not because he believed in what they did, but because at 22, with no family and no prospects and a rifle he'd won in a card game, riding with dangerous men had seemed more honest than starving slowly in the dust. He'd left the gang 2 years before, walked away after a job in New Mexico that went wrong in a way he still couldn't close his eyes without seeing. He'd been trying to get far enough north to disappear into Montana, maybe Canada, somewhere cold enough that the past felt like a different country entirely. He never made it. The Harlan brothers found him in the territory, put a knife in his side to send a message, took his horse to leave him helpless, and rode on, certain that the desert would finish what they'd started. The desert didn't finish it. Cecelia Voss did not let the desert finish it, and that one act of mercy was about to set off a chain of events that would shake Redrock Crossing to its foundation. Escalation. He stayed 2 weeks. He was supposed to stay 3 days. He told her that on day 4, when he could finally sit up without going white around the mouth, he said he needed to be gone before anyone started asking questions. She agreed. She brought him food and water and clean cloth for the wound, and she asked him nothing personal, which he noticed. On day 6, she found him sitting up reading one of her books, a battered copy of David Copperfield she'd carried all the way from St. Louis. He looked almost embarrassed. She told him to keep reading if he wanted. He read it in 2 days. On day 8, she came back after school to find that he had fixed the broken hinge on the storage room door, swept the floor, and left a small desert wildflower, deep purple, almost violent in its color, in the tin cup she used for water. She stood looking at that flower for a long time. There are moments in a person's life that work like doors. You walk through them before you understand that you've moved. This was one of those moments for Cecelia Voss. She just didn't know it yet. On day 10, he finally told her his name. On day 12, he told her what he was. She didn't speak for a long time after that. She sat with her hands folded in her lap in the way she did when she was thinking hard. He watched her face, trying to read what was coming: anger, fear, the sound of her walking out the door to find Marshal Holt. She said, finally, "Did you kill anyone who didn't try to kill you first?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "No." She looked at him carefully, the way she looked at a sentence she wasn't sure she could trust. "I believe you," she said. "I don't entirely know why." He said, "Neither do I." She stood up. She told him he could stay 2 more days, that she'd leave food by the door, and that he needed to be gone by Wednesday before the supply wagon came through and strangers started moving around the edges of town. She walked to the door. Then she stopped. She said without turning around, "The wildflower." "Where did you find it?" He told her. "Half a mile north, in a dry creek bed where water must have passed through recently. A patch of them, growing up through the cracked clay like they had no idea they weren't supposed to be there." She nodded slowly. And she left. But she didn't sleep that night. Not even close. Stay with us. Because what happens next, I promise you, I will not see coming. And if this story is already living under your skin, you know what to do. Subscribe to Desert Heart Cinema. Turn on the bell, because every story we tell is worth finishing. Mide Vedier Curiosity Loop. Wednesday came. Wednesday went. Cole Maddox was still there. And the thing that no one had anticipated, aren't he? Least of all either of them, aren't he? Was that this felt inevitable. Not reckless. Not foolish. Inevitable. Like 2 rivers that had spent years running separately and had simply, finally found the same valley. They talked at night when the town was quiet. She told him about St. Louis, about her brother's illness and the doctors and the money and the long ride west on a train that smelled like coal and other people's desperation. He listened the way people who spend a lot of time alone tend to listen, completely, without interrupting, as if words were something rare and worth treating carefully. He told her small things about himself, the town where he was born, a horse he'd loved as a kid, a song his mother used to sing that he still remembered every word of but had never told anyone. She listened and understood that these were not small things at all. These were the most valuable things he owned. They did not touch. Not for the first 3 weeks. There was something between them that was almost more charged for that restraint, a kind of electricity that neither of them named, because naming it would make it real, and real things can be taken away. But here's the thing about Redrock Crossing. It was a small town, and small towns see everything, even when they're not looking. Story, developing. It was Mrs. Pruitt who first noticed that the schoolteacher was buying more food than one woman could eat. It was the blacksmith who noticed the light in the schoolhouse storage room past midnight. It was a boy named Tommy Fitch, 9 years old, one of Cecelia's students, 9, who saw a man's shadow moving behind the frosted glass of the small rear window and told his father. Tommy's father told the marshal. Marshal Holt came to see Cecelia on a Tuesday afternoon while the children were at recess. He was a careful man, Holt. Not cruel, not corrupt, wronged. Just careful, the way men are when they've survived long enough in difficult places to understand that carelessness is the most expensive habit you can have. He asked her if everything was all right, if she'd noticed anything unusual. She looked him directly in the eye and said that everything was fine. He held her gaze for one moment longer than was comfortable. Then he nodded, touched the brim of his hat, and walked back toward the main street. That night she told Cole he had to leave. Really leave this time. She said it without drama, without tears, the way she said hard things, all plainly, because plain truths are kinder than decorated ones. He didn't argue. He nodded. He began gathering the very few things he had. Then he stopped. He turned to look at her across the small, dusty room, and he said the thing that broke the careful silence they'd maintained for 3 weeks. He said, "I've been in a lot of places, Cecelia. I've never once wanted to stay anywhere. I want to stay here." The room was very still. She said, "I know." 2 words. But the way she said them, mine, the weight she put in them, the way she didn't look away, I told him everything. He stayed. What followed was the most dangerous month of both their lives, and also somehow the most alive either of them had ever felt. He moved at night. She moved through the day. They passed each other in the small geography of that storage room like 2 people learning a careful dance, a rance, close enough to feel each other's warmth, careful enough not to disturb the fragile thing they were building. She brought him paper and he wrote letters that he never sent, to people from his past he wanted to explain himself to. She read them sometimes when he offered. She never said they were good or bad. She just said what she thought was true in them and what she thought wasn't, and he found her honesty was the most valuable thing anyone had given him since childhood. He taught her to shoot, out in the dry creek bed where the purple flowers grew, in the gray hour before dawn when the light was too thin for anyone to see clearly at a distance. She was a fast learner, better than he'd been, and he'd been naturally good. She told him she suspected she'd been too cautious her entire life, and that caution had been a kind of cage. He told her she wasn't cautious, she was precise. There was a difference. She thought about that for days afterward. But October was ending, and the Harlan brothers were not finished with Cole Maddox. Sekin twist Svarn, the Big3. They sent a messenger first. That was their way, our reveal. Not a warning exactly, more of an announcement. A drifter came for Redrock Crossing one Friday evening and left a single playing card tucked into the door of the livery stable where Cole's horse was stabled. The card was the ace of spades, cut in half. Cole found it and said nothing to Cecelia. He began sleeping with one eye open, which she noticed because people who sleep with one eye open have a certain stillness about them that is the opposite of rest. She asked him what was happening. He told her it was fine. She looked at him the same way she looked at that first sentence of his, Enger. The look that said, "I can tell the difference between a truth and a thing shaped like one." He told her about the card. He told her about the Harlan brothers. He told her more than he'd told her before because he'd had 3 weeks to understand that she wasn't a woman you protected by leaving in the dark. She was a woman you respected by letting her see clearly. She listened. She didn't panic. She asked 2 practical questions. Then she said, "Tell me the plan." He looked at her with an expression impossible to entirely decode. Aralt. Something between gratitude and wonder and a kind of grief, like a man who has found something extraordinary and already understands it won't last. He said, "I'm working on one." She said, "Work faster." Here is what neither of them knew. What no one in Redrock Crossing knew. What Marshal Holt himself had only learned the previous evening from a telegram that arrived in code from the federal office. The Harlan brothers weren't coming to Redrock Crossing to finish Cole Maddox. They were coming to rob the bank. Cole Maddox was the cover story, the distraction. Roy Harlan had a mind like a chess player, always thinking 4 moves ahead. He had learned that Cole was hiding in this town. He'd sent the ace of spades not to warn Cole, but to panic him, wrath, to make him visible, to make him move, to ensure that when the brothers rode into Redrock Crossing, all eyes would be on the wanted man and not on the 3 riders coming in from the south with bedrolls full of something heavier than clothes. The bank held $60,000, a cattle baron's sale. The money was there for exactly 1 week. This was day 5. And here's the terrible twist. Matt, the thing that catches in the throat when you understand it fully. Cecelia had sent a letter 2 weeks earlier to her brother in St. Louis. In describing the town in her careful detail, she had mentioned the bank, the deposit, the cattle baron. That letter had been intercepted, read by someone in the postal service who sold information, passed along a chain of hands until it reached Roy Harlan. Cecelia Voss, without knowing it, had painted a target on this town, and the man she was protecting from that town was the only one who could save it. Resolution. Cole figured it out the night before it happened. Not from any single thing, from a dozen small things stacking on top of each other in his mind. A horse he didn't recognize tied outside the saloon, a stranger who asked too many questions about the bank's layout, the way the drifter who'd brought the card had spent an extra day in town, watching before riding south. He sat with it for a long time in the darkness of that storage room. Then he woke Cecelia up. He told her everything he'd figured out. He told her about the letter too, gently, carefully, making clear that she had nothing to feel guilty about. She had simply been herself, which was precise and detailed and trusting of the world. None of that was a flaw. She was white around the mouth when he finished. Not from fear. From something harder to name one. The specific nausea of understanding that your innocent actions can have consequences that ripple far beyond you. She pressed her hands flat on the table and breathed slowly. Then, she looked up. She said, "We have to warn Holt." Cole said, "If I walk into that Marshal's office, I'm not walking out." She knew that. She'd known it before she said it. She said it anyway, because it was the right thing. And she was a woman who led with what was right, even when it was expensive. He said, "I can stop them outside of town. Before they get to the bank. If I ride out tonight, position myself in the canyon pass south of here, quote, is the only way in from that direction." She said, "Alone." He said, "It's what I know how to do." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing that shook him more than the knife in his side ever had. She said, "Then I'm going to walk into that Marshal's office right now and tell him everything. The gang, the bank, the plan, all of it." He stared at her. She said, "He'll protect the bank from the inside. You stop them from coming in. And yes, I'll tell him you're here." She held his gaze. "Cole, I will not let you die out there because I was too afraid to say your name." The room was completely still. He said, "Cecelia." She said, "I know what it costs." He said, "It costs me everything. They'll arrest me. I'll hang." She said, very quietly, "Or they'll see what you did. And maybe, just maybe, a man's last act is allowed to speak louder than all the ones that came before it." He looked at her for a long time, that gray flint gaze, reading her the way she had learned to read him, completely, without flinching, as if the truth between them was too important to blink away. He stood up. He put on his hat. He checked his rifle. At the door, he stopped. He didn't turn around. He said, quietly, to the dark outside, the creek bed, the flowers, "Remember where they are." She said, "I'll remember everything." And he walked out into the desert night, Marshal Holt listened to Cecelia Voss for 11 minutes without interrupting her. When she finished, he sat very still. Then he stood up, called his 2 deputies, and began making preparations. He did not immediately send anyone after Cole Maddox. He would explain later that there were 2 threats to deal with, and you dealt with them in order of urgency. The Harlan brothers rode into the canyon pass at dawn. They found Cole waiting. What happened in that canyon is the part of this story that Redrock Crossing talked about for 30 years. 3 armed men against one, a narrow pass, red rock walls that turned every sound into an echo. It lasted 4 minutes. Roy Harlan was the only one who rode out. He rode out with his hands raised and Marshal Holt's deputies waiting on the other side. He was tried in Tucson 6 weeks later and sentenced to 20 years. Cole Maddox rode back into Redrock Crossing with a bullet in his left arm and dust so thick on him he looked like something the desert had made rather than something passing through it. He rode directly to the marshal's office. He tied his horse outside. He walked in and laid his rifle on the desk. He said, "I expect you know who I am." Marshal Holt looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the window, where Cecelia Voss was standing outside, very still, watching. Holt said, "I know who you were. I'm still deciding who you are." Powerful Indian Cole Maddox was held in the Redrock Crossing jail for 6 weeks, while telegrams went back and forth between 3 territories and 1 federal office. Cecelia visited every day. She brought books. He read them. She told him what was happening outside. He listened the way he always listened, RAs and else, completely, as if her words were the most important thing in whatever room he was in. The charges were complicated. The evidence was old. 2 of the men who could have testified against him were dead. 1 had disappeared into Mexico. Roy Harlan, facing 20 years, was not feeling cooperative, and there was the matter of what Cole Maddox had done in that canyon. The bank, the $60,000, the town that was still standing because of a man who had no particular reason to save it. The federal judge who reviewed the case was a man named Aldrich. He had been on the bench for 22 years, and he had seen most of what the West had to offer in terms of human complication. He read the file for 3 hours. Then he wrote his decision in the careful, precise hand of a man who chose his words the way Cecelia Voss did, because plain truths are kinder than decorated ones. Cole Maddox walked out of the Redrock Crossing jail on a cold November morning. The sun was the color of the desert wildflowers, rond, deep gold, almost violent in its brightness. Cecelia was waiting outside. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. They stood in the cold morning air, and the town moved around them the way towns do, ahache, indifferent and alive and completely unaware of the weight of what it was witnessing. He said finally, "The creek bed is probably dry by now." She said, "The flowers come back every year. I checked." He nodded slowly. And somewhere in that nod was everything, the answer to a question neither of them had ever quite asked out loud, the end of one story and the quiet beginning of another. Some loves are not permitted by the world. They exist in the margins, in the spaces between what's allowed and what's true. They are built in storage rooms and dry creek beds, in the gray hour, before dawn, in the silence between 2 people who have decided to see each other clearly. Cecelia Voss and Cole Maddox stayed in Redrock Crossing. She kept teaching. He found work, wrought, honest work, the kind that leaves a man tired in a way that feels like something earned. They were not married for another 2 years, because the world required that kind of patience from people like them. But every morning, before the town woke up, there were 2 sets of footprints leading out to the dry creek bed half a mile north, and 2 sets coming back. And every September, without fail, the purple flowers came back up through the cracked clay, growing where they had no business growing, completely unaware they weren't supposed to be there. The West remembers what it wants to remember. But sometimes, if you know where to look, it leaves small, violent bursts of color behind. Right where the water once passed through, right where someone once chose to stay. Cole Maddox rode into that canyon alone. Cecelia Voss walked into that marshal's office and said his name out loud, Ariant, knowing what it would cost. Some loves are not meant to be easy. They are meant to be true. And truth, out here in the desert, is the rarest thing of all. If this story stayed with you, if it made you feel something real, then you're exactly where you belong. This is Desert Heart Cinema. Subscribe. Share this with someone who still believes in love that costs something. And we'll see you in the next story. The West has many more secrets left to tell.